You're watching All 24 News World News Program live from Algiers. Algiers up next are the headlines. Algeria hit back at Mali's junta at the UN, calling their remarks a soldier's delirium. Algiers also posed or pressed for a real solution to the Sahara issue and an end to foreign interference in Libya. Also coming up in Gaza, dozens have been killed as the hospital war deepens. Algeria says the Palestinian cause is facing an existential threat, even as it welcomes new efforts to end the Nakba. Coming up next in Morocco, protests are growing despite the harsh crackdown that rights groups are denouncing. At the same time, the port of Tangier has received 2 new ships loaded with weapons. And in Europe, Poland is urging Western allies to close ranks against Russia. President Zelensky is pushing for a regional alliance, while Moscow warns Europe risks sliding into a war involving weapons of mass destruction. All this and more shortly. Welcome back to the program. Algeria's Minister of State and Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf has fired back at Mali's junta Prime Minister Abdoulaye Maiga, dismissing his UN speech as delirium of a crude soldier and vulgar chatter deserving only contempt. Speaking before the UN General Assembly, Attaf accused Bamako of attempting for the second year in a row a coup against Algeria from the UN podium, calling it the height of impudence and baseness.
I note here that for the second consecutive year, a coup maker among the coup plotters in Mali dares, from this very platform, to attack Algeria. The heights of audacity, immorality, and vulgarity to which this failed poet and genuine coup maker has climbed are nothing but the ravings of a crude soldier, and his vulgar chatter deserves nothing but contempt and provokes nothing but disgust. Instead of excelling in the art of blaming others for his failures and diverting attention from all his shortcomings, we had hoped, and we allow ourselves to hope, that this crude soldier and his like would excel in other, nobler and more beneficial arts for Mali. The art of striving to restore security and stability in their country, the art of working to improve the living standards of their people, and the art of enabling Mali to achieve governors benefiting its rich history, governors marked by competence, elevated by integrity, and distinguished by honesty and loyalty.
On Western Sahara, Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf said a real solution has to come from both parties to the conflict, not dictated by one side or imposed from outside. He stressed that any deal must respect international decolonization principles and guarantee the Sahrawi people the right to self-determination.
From our perspective, the genuine and desired solution to this conflict must adhere to 5 main principles. First, the solution must be undertaken under the full and permanent sponsorship of the United Nations. Second, it must be based on direct negotiations between the parties to the conflict, the Kingdom of Morocco and the Polisario Front. Third, the solution should be crafted and developed by the parties themselves, not dictated or imposed by either side or by any other external actors. Fourth, the substance of the solution must align with the principles of the United Nations doctrine regarding the elimination of colonialism and the fair treatment of peoples living under its yoke. Fifth and finally, the solution must enable the Sahrawi people to fully exercise their right to self-determination in accordance with the relevant United Nations resolutions.
On the same occasion, Algeria called for an end to foreign meddling in Libya, urging instead a consensual solution through presidential and parliamentary elections. Addressing the UN General Assembly, Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf said Libyans, 14 years into the crisis, must be free to choose leaders truly committed to a national project.
14 years after the outbreak of this crisis, this brotherly country remains trapped in divisions that are fueled, nurtured, and exploited by foreign interventions according to agendas that bear no connection to the welfare, security, or stability of Libya. Had the matter been in the hands of Libyans alone, they would have resolved their disputes and paved the way to end the crisis long ago. The time has come to put a definitive end to foreign interventions in Libyan affairs so that the Libyan people can heal their wounds, reunite and restore unity among their sons and daughters. Only then will we have paved the way broadly for a consensual solution based on presidential and parliamentary elections through which Libyans can freely choose representatives who believe in and are committed to the unified and inclusive Libyan national project.
بالمشروع الوطني الليبي الموحد والجامع.
Turning to Gaza now, at least 36 Palestinians, most of them women and children, were killed Monday in fresh occupation attacks on displaced families across the Strip. The Palestinian news agency says 28 bodies were pulled from bombed homes and tents in Gaza City, while 2 more were recovered after raids on the Nusayrat and Barij camps. In Khan Younis, the Nasser Medical Complex reported 6 more martyrs, including 4 people shot dead near an aid center north of Rafah. In another development, Al-Auda Hospital says it received 13 martyrs and treated 15 wounded in just 24 hours after occupation forces targeted civilians waiting for aid south of Wadi Gaza. The Health Ministry, meanwhile, reports 2,571 people have now died from starvation after reaching hospitals, with more than 18,800 others injured. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Health Ministry says Israeli forces are besieging 91 people inside a Shifa hospital, among them doctors, patients, and 12 infants in intensive care. Gaza's media office chief Ismail Tawabta said nearby Al-Helo hospital was bombed overnight, cutting off access in or out. He added that the occupation has deliberately severed internet connections, isolating the facility and crippling medical services, leaving doctors and patients trapped in fear and panic. The few hospitals still operating in Gaza are hanging by a thread, overwhelmed by debris, power cuts, and a severe shortage of medical supplies. Care has been reduced to the bare minimum, leaving many of the wounded with little or no help. Zafar Jani has more.
Crumbling walls, shattered glass, destroyed medical equipment. This is what's left of Gaza's hospitals. Most facilities can barely function. In some, treatment is down to the bare minimum, with no staff, no supplies, no electricity, and at times, no water. It's a public health disaster unfolding in the middle of the escalating Zionist genocide.
Yesterday, the situation around Shifa was extremely tense, especially near Al-Helo Hospital, which had been hit the night before. Medical staff were panicked, and so were the patients. Many left the hospital on their own. We're all still here doing the bare minimum to keep admitted patients alive, but we demand the hospitals be kept out of Israeli attacks and allowed to operate normally.
Airstrikes keep coming, and hospital corridors have turned into makeshift shelters as much as wards. Doctors and nurses, driven by duty and sacrifice, are forced to keep working, even at the risk of their own lives.
Gaza City, again, has become a combat zone, but moving them where? There is no safe place for them to go. And moreover, the health infrastructure that is required to keep them alive is no longer present in other some of the few remaining hospitals or clinics in Gaza. So they've reached a point where the only thing that can save them is a ceasefire, is when the guns go silent and they don't need to be relocated from the areas where they can be kept in incubators.
With no equipment, no power, and no relief, Gaza's hospitals are falling apart, one after the other. And with no ceasefire or humanitarian pause in sight, lives that could still be saved are slipping away, while the world looks on, silent, at what has become an ethnic cleansing.
In another story, Doctors Without Borders says it has suspended life-saving services in Gaza City after Zionist strikes and raids on humanitarian facilities made conditions too dangerous for its staff. The group warns that hundreds of patients, including children and infants, are now at grave risk under the continuing siege of hospitals.
We have no choice but to suspend our operations because our clinics are surrounded by Israeli forces. This is the last thing we want, as the needs in Gaza City are immense. The most vulnerable, especially infants, in the neonatal care unit and those with severe injuries or life-threatening illness cannot be moved and are in grave danger.
Algerian Minister of State and Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf has warned that the Palestinian cause is facing its gravest threat yet, the systematic elimination of the two-state solution. Speaking at the UN General Assembly, he accused the Israeli occupation of going beyond Palestine and openly pushing ahead with the so-called Greater Israel Project.
إن هذه القضية تواجه اليوم الخطر الأعظم في تاريخها.
This cause is today facing the most dangerous threat, which is the danger of its erasure from existence through the annexation of land, the displacement of people, the tightening of the noose on the legitimate institutions that embody it, as well as the elimination of the agreed-upon two-state solution. This danger is not only stopping at the doorstep of Palestine after the Israeli occupation openly declared its intention to revive and activate what it calls the Greater Israel Project.
ما يسميه بالمشروع مشروع إسرائيل الكبرى.
On the same occasion, Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf welcomed efforts to end what he called the Nakba in Gaza, stressing the importance of tackling the roots of the Palestinian struggle. He said Algeria is closely following U.S. brokered talks aimed at stopping the ongoing tragedies in the Strip.
من هذا المنظور تتابع الجزائر.
As we appreciate the momentum of diplomatic acknowledgements of the State of Palestine, we renew the call issued by President Abdelmajid Tebboune for the full membership of the State of Palestine in our international organization. The entire world must understand that the establishment of the Palestinian state is not a choice but an inevitable certainty. It is not a favor but an inherent and rightful right. It is not a hope, but an essential condition without which there can be no return to peace and stability in the Middle East region.
بكل جذور الصراع الإسرائيلي الفلسطيني.
Still with Gaza-related news, Spain has condemned the transfer of warplanes and warships, including U.S. F-35 jets, to the Zionist entity, reaffirming its ban on Spanish territory being used in the war on Gaza. El País reported Madrid has told Washington that U.S. bases at Ruta and Morón de la Frontera cannot be used to route weapons to the occupation directly or indirectly. To another development in the Middle East still, Iran's judiciary has executed a man it describes as one of the Zionist occupation's most important spies in the country. A judicial statement confirmed the spy executed on Monday had gained access to Iran's sovereign databases. For a third day, Moroccan streets have filled with demonstrators, largely young people, reiterating social demands and even calls to overthrow the monarchy. The peaceful protests were met with violent crackdown by the country's authorities. Salman Seif has more.
Across Morocco, a new generation is stepping up, independent and afraid and determined. Without backing from parties or unions, young voices are taken to the streets to demand dignity, justice, and real change. Among them is Miriam, a human rights activist from Agadir, seen by many as part of the voice of Morocco's Generation Z.
This is a social movement born out of the injustice faced by the ordinary citizen. It carries clear demands strictly social in nature, with priorities like healthcare, education, and fundamental rights. Young people took to the streets to protest, exercising a right guaranteed by the Constitution. But as always, the Makhzen responded with repression.
Despite harassment and heavy restrictions from the Makhzen, which use every tool of repression, Miriam and thousands of other young people still choose to march and make their voices heard.
We don't trust political parties. Our demands are clear. First, education. Second, healthcare. Third, social justice and dignity.
This is a peaceful protest aimed at voicing our demands.
Even though the protesters were young and peaceful, they were met with violence, beaten with batons, arbitrarily arrested and thrown into detention centers in a blatant violation of human rights.
We're being repressed. In response to social crisis, they use crackdowns, deliberate arrests, and trials.
The protest wave in Morocco has drawn international attention, with foreign media spotlighting the crackdown on demonstrators. Many noted that the demands went far beyond simple reforms, with some even calling for the monarchy's overthrow. For Morocco's youth, the message is loud and clear. They're done with silence, ready to be heard and unwilling to settle for anything less than real change.
Still in Morocco, leading human rights groups are denouncing the crackdown on demonstrators, insisting accountability should fall on those responsible for the country's social and economic collapse. They warn that silence in protests shows a lack of political will to address popular demands and say a security-first approach will only worsen the national crisis. Morocco's BDS movement warned that Tangier port will receive 2 cargo ships, the Nest Maersk on Monday and the North Folk Maersk on Wednesday, carrying weapons bound for the Zionist entity to fuel the genocide in Gaza. The movement urged port workers not to handle the shipments and called on unions to shield them from state pressure and threats.
We issue the same call to the workers of Tangier Medport who refrain from providing any service to the genocide fleet of the company Maersk, especially the ships Nested Maersk and Norfolk Maersk involved in transporting military equipment to the occupied ports of Haifa and Ashdod.
In another topical news story, in Poland, Prime Minister Donald Tusk is urging Western allies to step into the fight against Russia, saying the war is now at his country's doorstep. Speaking at the Warsaw Security Forum, he said recent Russian airspace violations are a calculated test of Kyiv's allies and warned that for Poland, war is no longer a choice, but a compulsion.
Russian aggression is part of a political project aimed at subjugating other peoples. If we lose this war, the consequences will not only affect our generation, but also the next generation in Poland, across Europe, the United States, and everywhere else in the world.
For his part, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has proposed a regional alliance to create a joint air defense shield against what he called Russian threats. Addressing the Warsaw Security Forum, Zelensky stated that Kyiv's experience in dealing with air threats would benefit NATO, especially now that the Russian threat has reached Poland and the Baltic states.
Ukraine proposes to Poland and all our partners the creation of a truly joint and reliable shield against Russian aerial threats. This is achievable. Kiev can counter all types of Russian drones and missiles, and if we work together in the region, we will have enough weapons and production capacity for these systems. If Russia loses the ability to strike from the sky, it will no longer be able to continue the war.
Russia's Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev has warned that the conflict with Europe could spiral into a war involving weapons of mass destruction. Writing on Telegram, he accused European leaders of lacking the competence to make sound military decisions and said crisis-hit divided states are incapable of sustaining a war with Russia. It is time to catch up on more international news stories in the News in Brief with Sofian Kanturi.
Sudanese committee reported Sunday that 95 people, including 73 children, died in 40 days at Abu Shouk camp in Al-Fashir due to hunger and disease, amid worsening security and shortages of food, water and services. The Electoral Commission announced Sunday that incumbent President Wavel Ramkalawan won 46.4% of the vote, while opposition candidate Patrick Hermini received 48.8%. The date of the runoff will be announced later. EU reinstates sanctions on Iran, banning arms and energy trade, freezing major banks' assets, and restricting Iranian aircraft and ships, in line with UN decision. US President Donald Trump has issued a fresh warning of sweeping federal layoffs if the government fails to reach a deal to avert shutdown this week. In an interview with NBC News on Sunday, Trump said the move is meant to increase the pressure on Congress to strike an agreement and prevent shutdown, as tensions rise among lawmakers over spending priorities.
And finally, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, war has torn lives apart, leaving thousands of people amputated to this day. Yet amid the suffering, locally made prosthetic limbs are giving back hope to those who thought they had lost everything. More details with Karim Fazakri.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the scars of war aren't just memories. They are etched on bodies and lives, changing them forever. Even far from the front lines, the war's destruction still takes its toll.
Everything has changed. I haven't worked since the bombing, neither has my mother. This war has left so many people disabled, and so many others have died. We pray for it to end, and for our leaders to show mercy, and finally put a stop to all this suffering.
In Goma, specialized centers are offering some hope. There, artificial limbs are being crafted and fitted for those who once thought they'd never walk again.
In the past, the numbers weren't this high. Back then, most of the people who came here were born with a disability, but now there are far more amputees than before.
The orthopedic center is meeting more patients every day, most of them living with the permanent loss of one or more limbs. This 30-year-old survivor of bombing lost everything: his leg, his wife, and his 4 children.
There were 4 of us, me, my son, my young brother, and another person. By God's grace, we survived, but my wife and 4 children were killed instantly. 12 people died there. On the same day, I was rushed to the hospital, and on the same night, they amputed my leg. Later, they told me there was no other option but to fit me with a prosthetic so I could walk again, like everyone else.
Hundreds of others share the same fate. In a split second, their lives were turned upside down. For many in Congo, these prosthetics are not just tools of recovery, but a chance to rebuild lives torn apart by war.
And that wraps up tonight's program. For the latest updates, stay connected with us on our social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, X, and Instagram, as well as our website. On behalf of all 24 News team, I'm Islam Sid. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.